What is up, everyone? Welcome to our Season 1 recap show. I'm your host, Mike Peters, also known as Majesty95. We are joined by our co-host, David Roy, also known as WKXT on the forum. Happy to have you guys here. We're going to start off with our first game recap of the week as the Lions took down the Browns in an overtime thriller. Josh Rosen and Paxton Lynch, two young quarterbacks, going after it. It went to overtime. David, you watched this game. Give us the recap.
Detroit had a big lead going into the fourth quarter. It was a 10-point lead, 27-17 going into it. Denver managed to come back from 10 down to really turn it around and force the overtime. For overtime itself, it was back and forth. And it set up the turnover to create the game-winning 55-yard field goal by Cody Parkey to really seal the deal for Detroit. And, you have to give Detroit some credit. They survived the nail-biter. They have momentum under Josh Rosen. He finished a game, 75.8 QBR, 1 touchdown, 2 picks, you see there. You have to wonder, though, they have the momentum going forward. Now the question is, can we build on it going forward in a very tough competitive division, as you'll see as we go out through the show? Denver, Paxton Lynch played solid in a loss. You have to give the man credit. Adrian Peterson, he's obviously trying to show that despite his age, he can still play. So the question is, based on Lynch's play, will it be enough to carry this team forward and own the AFC West?
Well, this was an interesting game because the Lions last year were right in the middle of the pack. I believe they finished 9-7, just missed out on the playoffs. The Broncos, meanwhile, struggled, and I believe they went 4-12, or maybe 5-11 if memory serves. So this is an interesting game because it's not one that most people expected the Broncos to be in, and so the question kind of becomes, have the Lions taken a step back, or have the Broncos taken a step forward? Now, if you look at Lynch, he had a nice game, 302 yards, 2 TDs, 1 interception. He was very solid, definitely looking to take a step up now in his third year and try to lead Denver into the playoffs. They won the division a couple years ago, so they're trying to get back and rebound from a bad season. Adrian Peterson seems to be the ageless wonder. He's older, but he's still coming through. Golden Tate coming through for him. So the Broncos, I think, looked really well. I think the Lions did what they needed to. Rosen, like you said, was a little bit shaky, but they had some great games. Abdullah, 131 yards, great game from him, around 8 yards a carry. Session, their rookie receiver, came out with 100 yards in his first game. So I think overall, I think this says more about the Broncos stepping back up and bringing their game back up than it does anything about the Lions. I think the Lions show their fortitude by coming away with the win in Detroit. Do you kind of agree with that sentiment?
I would agree with that completely. The only concern I would have going forward is you've got to be able to put teams away. Even if it is 10 down, you gave up 10 fourth quarter points and you didn't put up any at all in the fourth quarter. That's something to keep an eye on moving forward for the rest of the season for Detroit.
Absolutely. Definitely going to be interesting to watch both of those teams going forward. We'll go ahead to our second game on the slate as another NFC Central team. Actually not Central anymore. It's the North. What am I doing? Two NFC North teams, the Packers and the Bears, squaring off in a very close game, divisional game. Packers come away 30-28. Very, very tight game, not knowing what to expect from the new Packers owner, veteran owner in Chicago. That was a tight game all the way. Packers come away with a 2-point win. What did you think about that one?
I think that as you look at it, Aaron Rodgers, he might be taking a bit of a step back. The man is 35. He's kind of maybe slipping a little bit. Christian McCaffrey really helped to bail him out. Adams played well, came through for him. But you have to really wonder, is Aaron Rodgers starting to go down this decline that a lot of players seem to do? Is he kind of taking a step back? He didn't seem to have the same kind of magic that he typically brings. As I look at Chicago, put up 28 in the loss. I have to ask the question, though, is Matthew Stafford the second coming of Jay Cutler in Chicago? He didn't look great yesterday despite the numbers. He started out 0 for 3 with an interception early in the game. And you have to wonder if moving forward, is this team going to be able to rally around him? For the first part of that game, they looked to seem to be lacking in energy. They didn't really have any enthusiasm. Now, can you attribute some of that to Dalvin Cook and the way he played and his lack of performance? Certainly you can make that argument, but I definitely have to wonder if this team is going to be able to rally around Matthew Stafford moving forward in the NFC North.
Well, Dalvin Cook's an interesting player to talk about there. 12 carries, only 20 yards in this game. Hasn't really been the home run threat or the breakout threat that Chicago hoped he was going to be when they drafted him. Hasn't had a 1,000-yard season. Judging by this game, not on pace for a 1,000-yard season coming up. He's been really struggling the Bears, and I don't know. There's always two parts to every story. Is this more indicative of the Bears line, who allowed 47 sacks to Matthew Stafford last year? Or is it just Dalvin Cook not doing enough? And, that's been the one thing that's plagued Chicago for many, many years, especially since Matt Forte has been gone, is they haven't really been able to get an effective running game. And they thought Dalvin Cook was going to solve that. They brought in Jamal Charles a couple years ago, and it really hasn't taken him over the edge. And now it's really Dalvin Cook. And that's it. If he's not able to be their go-to guy, then, they have Howard still in the backup role, but they're really trying to go to Cook, and he hasn't been able to get it done for him. However, passing, that's where their bread's kind of been buttered for the last few years. Darboh and White both have over 80 yards receiving and a touchdown. They're going to throw it around. They're going to try to beat you passing now. They'd love to get a running game going. Doesn't look like it's going to go. But as you said, Stafford starts off with 2 interceptions. Had a good game overall, 359 yards. I mean, that's an impressive game. But you got to worry about the turnover. He took 47 sacks last year. And, if the line didn't improve a whole lot, as we see with Cook, not able to get a whole lot going, that could be a rough year. And, already starting off 0-1 in the division is not something the Bears are used to. So definitely going to be interesting to see how that goes. As talked about the Packers, like you said, McCaffrey kind of carried him, 98 yards, 2 touchdowns. Big game for him. Rodgers, he does look like he's lost a little bit of zip on his ball. That's going to be interesting to watch. He's getting up there a little bit, 35. Not the oldest quarterback in the league, but, he's at that point where a lot of guys start to decline. And even though they did pull out the big win against the number 2 team in that division, that's still a story that you got to watch. Can Rodgers keep it going all year? And can he stay healthy as you get older? That's always something that you want to watch as well. Any other final thoughts on this game?
I think as you look, Chicago's defense, you have to give them kudos for keeping this game tight up until halftime. The score was 10-6 in Green Bay's favor. So I have to wonder, though, that despite how well the Chicago defense played, is it going to be enough in a division where Green Bay is seeming to on the rise here, and you have Minnesota and the firepower that they have, and with Detroit, with them being able to accomplish what they did, is this defense in Chicago going to be enough to carry Chicago moving forward? We'll have to keep an eye on that.
Definitely something to keep an eye on. Moving on to our next game on the slate, one that you're very familiar with. 49ers and the Buccaneers playing in Tampa. Bucs come out with a 28-22 win in a game that featured 7 turnovers in this one. It was a back and forth affair, but a lot of turnovers, a lot of sloppy play. One guy that had very, very sloppy play was Deshaun Watson, the number 2 pick in the draft a couple of years ago. Had a pretty good sophomore season. He definitely showed signs of improvement last year. Looked to be the star of the offense, led the 49ers to the playoffs, and then in season 3, he comes out and completely lays a dud. 4 interceptions in his first game of the season. Didn't help that the running game wasn't really able to get going. Carlos Hyde only 40 yards on 13 carries. So, the passing game to some degree kept him going, as we saw Mike Williams 4 catches, 125 yards and a touchdown. But, with the running game kind of struggling and Watson throwing that many turnovers, you kind of think that the 49ers, are going to be off to some troubles if they continue seeing that kind of performance out of their star QB.
I think the other thing you have to keep in mind that, Watson got sacked 5 times. I think, as bad as the running game looked and as bad as Watson performed, I think part of it you have to keep in mind is the offensive line really kind of stirred around Deshaun Watson. They really caved into this Tampa Bay pass rush. And I think the other thing you have to look at that may go a little unnoticed over Tampa Bay's win here in the dramatic fashion that it took, took that fourth quarter play, last seconds, the bomb to Chris Conley to give him those receiving yards, and then the interception to seal the deal on San Francisco's part. But I think the underlying story here, and something that we definitely end up talking about if the 49ers had pulled this one away, is Doug Martin and this Tampa Bay running game really struggled. 14 carries for Martin, 16 yards. David Cobb wasn't any better. He had 8 carries for 22 yards. Now, granted, the running game is missing Darius Guice and Jimmy Lockhart, who's a rookie that they drafted this past season. While those two pieces are missing, even if they are inserted back in the lineup, will this running game change, and will it give that extra dynamic to this offense? That's something to be a little concerned about in Tampa Bay.
Well, one thing that's not to be concerned about in Tampa Bay is Jameis Winston and Chris Conley. That hookup or partnership hooked up for 6 catches, 227 yards, and 2 touchdowns. Conley's first game as a Buck sets their team single season or single game receiving yardage mark with the 227 yards. That's got to be something that Buccaneers management and fans are super excited about. Winston looked solid, had 1 turnover, the 1 interception, but had a really solid game overall. Has looked pretty good the last few seasons, so he definitely looks like he's coming into his own. And now it looks like he's got a star receiver out there opposite Mike Evans that could really kind of turn that offense into a much more explosive offense than we've seen in many years.
And that's definitely what Tampa Bay was trying to do when they brought in Chris Conley. That's certainly something they wanted. They knew going into the season they didn't have a true number 2 wide receiver. Dede Westbrook is great, but he's not a true number 2. They put him down in the slot. And I think what you're going to see is that teams are going to start respecting the deep ball more. Mike Evans, is somebody who can go downfield. He can go up and get him. Man, 6'5". I think Chris Conley, with his combination of being 6'3" and the speed that he has behind him, I think that's a threat that teams are going to start taking a little bit more respect of. So I think expect next week Tampa Bay is going to, kind of rein that deep ball back in a little bit to try and open that up for later on down the season.
I think you made a good point about Westbrook. He's definitely a better fit in the slot. Very quick, agile receiver. I think he makes a perfect slot receiver. Conley, with his size, is a great number 2, great complement to to Evans, like you said, who's a 6'5" possession receiver, can definitely a red zone threat. But now you can stretch the field, should open the game for the running game. We didn't see that so much in that game. Another notable performance here is Levante David, the All-Pro linebacker, 9 tackles, a tackle for a loss, a half a sack, and 2 picks in that game. He went absolutely crazy. If he is going to lead the defense to not only 4 turnovers, but that kind of play, the Bucs look once again, even though they're under new ownership this year, definitely look to be a threat in the league once again. We'll move on to our next game, our last recap of this week. It was a rematch of the NFC Championship game between the Minnesota Vikings and the Atlanta Falcons. This one taking place at the new Mercedes-Benz Stadium in Atlanta versus the NFC Championship game, which took place in Minnesota. We know that Atlanta came out on top in the NFC Championship game with a 9-point win, if I remember correctly. This time, the Vikings get revenge. It's only week 1. It's only regular season. It's not the playoffs, but Vikings do get revenge in this one. They had a 21-9 lead, and then it got up to 28-12. And actually, it was 28-9, and then it got to 28-12. So 19-point lead at one point for the Vikings. They struggled a little bit late in the game. Teddy Bridgewater tries to throw a pass into the flat. It gets picked off by Keanu Neal, who was playing a flat defense, takes it to the house to kind of change the momentum in this game. A couple plays later, the Vikings try to run up the middle. Latavius Murray gets hit by Devondre Campbell, who you guys will remember from the Super Bowl, forcing the fumble of Brandon Davis and picking that one up and taking it to the house to win the Super Bowl. Campbell does it again in the first game of the season, so not good news for the rest of the NFC if Campbell's going to play like this every game. But he forces a fumble on Latavius Murray, picks that one up, takes it to the house, and gets the Falcons within 3. Vikings got the ball back, were able to control the clock, and finally kill off the last few minutes of the fourth quarter and hold on for a 28-25 win. Very interesting game in this one, as it was very defensive early on. It started off 2-0 as Alex Anzalone blew up a play in the backfield, wound up being a safety, and then the Falcons get a touchdown, go up 9-0. And after that, it's kind of like what we saw in the Super Bowl, where the Jacksonville Jaguars took over, and then you see the next 28 points scored all by the Vikings. Were able to move down the field almost at will, up until the costly turnover by Bridgewater. So interesting thing to watch there. Ryan made a couple of costly interceptions in the red zone. Not something you see him do very much, but he is an older guy and he's not getting any younger. You got to wonder, is the Brett Rippon era going to come a little bit sooner than some people think in Atlanta? Some people thought whenever they didn't re-sign Ryan that was going to happen this year, but they wound up getting him back in free agency at a discounted price. Interesting game all around. Obviously, Coleman had 77 yards. He was doing good running. He ran well against the Vikings last year, also in the Super Bowl. So getting him going is definitely a plus for Atlanta, who has a lot of weapons. Julio Jones did go down with an injury. John Ross kind of picked up the slack, had 4 grabs for 111 yards, 2 long plays in that one. So a very, very solid game overall. But, the couple of picks by Ryan definitely changed the game, changed the momentum. But you see Devondre Campbell and Keanu O'Neal, they come up with big plays late in that one. So definitely something to watch for Atlanta. I think there's things to be gained by the way they finished the game out. On the Vikings side, Aaron Donald, wow, the talked about free agent in the offseason, was signed to the big contract. I believe it was like $17 million a year. They're pairing him. They moved him to the left end, opposite of Danielle Hunter, the reigning defensive player of the year on the other side. They got Linval Joseph. They brought in Josh Chapman, the man in the middle, 2 big guys to run stuff. And this defensive line did not disappoint. They forced 7 sacks on Matt Ryan in that game, 4 of them by Aaron Donald. Not only did Donald have 4 sacks, he also led the team with 10 tackles. He was all over the place. And if he's going to play that way all season, the NFC is in a lot of trouble. But you can also flip that around and say, is that more indicative of the Falcons line, who has never been super great? They've been good. They've been competent. They obviously won a Super Bowl, but that's got to concern them a little bit. What were your thoughts on that game?
Well, as I watch a game, I have to kind of wonder, and I have to ask the question, how much longer does Matt Ryan have in this league? He's up there in age. With the shots that he took yesterday and with the way this offensive line has been playing, you have to wonder how much longer he has left in the league. He's in a division with 2 great defensive lines. You look at what Tampa Bay did yesterday and the way they bullied around San Francisco up front in the trenches. And you have to remember that Carolina's not a slouch defensively either. So you have to just wonder how much longer does Matt Ryan have left in the league if he's going to keep taking this kind of punishment. The other thing I'd add to that is, they went out in free agency and they brought in Demaryius Thomas and some of these other offensive weapons. All the weapons in the world don't make a difference if Ryan doesn't have the time to deliver. So I think what you're going to see is trying to get more quick hitting plays, trying to find a little bit of a rhythm to get Matt Ryan a little more comfortable. And that's really the key to beat a pass rush as great as Minnesota is. Figure out some short fire throws to set up your deeper throws, so that you can force a defense to be a little more conservative to respect that. But definitely going forward, I have to wonder, how well is this offensive line going to hold up in that division?
Very good point. That's going to be the big thing to watch. Definitely something to keep an eye on. One note for the Vikings, Teddy Bridgewater, 330 yards and 2 touchdowns. He did have the 1 interception, but he only threw 10 picks last year. If you remember, a couple years ago, he was right up in the MVP race. He threw for over 4,000 yards, and I want to say it was like 36 touchdowns. So he was off to a big game in this one. Definitely be something to watch, along with that new and seemingly improved Vikings defense. Moving along, our last segment of the show is we had a bunch of trades going on early in the season, in the preseason, and even into week 1. David, you're our VIP insider. Break down the trades for us. What did we see, and how are they going to impact the teams that they are a part of now?
Well, we'll start with Tennessee and Kansas City. They had several going forward. Tennessee, they sent out Derrick Henry, which I felt was a bit of a surprise. They went out and they got Tyreek Hill from Kansas City with a second round pick attached to that deal to benefit the Chiefs. They pick up the second rounder, they get Derrick Henry. But also in cohesion with that, you see that Tennessee trade away Kendall Wright and their left outside linebacker, Kenny Young, who's a young guy, hasn't been in the league too long, and a first round pick as well for Kansas City's free safety, Eric Berry. So you have to make the assumption it's win now in Nashville. And as we'll talk about a little bit later before we wrap up, we'll see how big this is going to be moving forward with the game of the week this week. But, Kendall Wright, he had 4 catches, 52 yards. For the Chiefs. Tyreek Hill was maybe a bit of a disappointment for Tennessee. He didn't really show up, but maybe that was by design as they seemingly put down Jacksonville. Derrick Henry, he had 14 carries, 38 yards, 2 touchdowns. Wasn't a slouch, but he was only held to 2.7 yards a carry. So you have to wonder if they're going to figure out a way to get Derrick Henry going. Wasn't the greatest in terms of the rushing game there, but he certainly complemented that running attack.
Big trades in some way as Eric Berry moves on, and he is going to be playing in Tennessee now. We talked about Tennessee and KC pull off one trade. That was the second trade between the two teams. Big guy on the move. He is getting a little bit older. He had the battle with cancer earlier. He's bounced back, been a solid player. What does that trade look like for both of those teams?
I think the thing that you quickly kind of see is that Eric Berry is an addition in the secondary for Tennessee. And I think that's something that they understood that they needed to have in a division where you have DeAndre Hopkins to contest with. You may not have a lot of big weapons in Jacksonville, but the weapons that they do have are solid enough, and Blake Bortles is playing well. And you still have Andrew Luck. Now, while the rest of Indy may be falling apart, Andrew Luck is still Andrew Luck. He's still a great talent. I think Eric Berry provides some extra help in the secondary in terms of coverage, but he's a do-it-all kind of guy. He can come up and he can make some great plays in the running game too. So I would definitely say that in that respect, that Tennessee got a great benefit there. Kansas City's side of the deal, Kendall Wright was a big weapon that certainly helped the Chiefs hold out against Oakland over the weekend. We'll see if he gets more involved in Kansas City's scheme offensively. But Mitch Trubisky certainly seemed to enjoy the extra help.
Couple of big trades so far. We had a couple of more. I believe Denver was involved in them. What were the other trades that went down?
Minnesota, they traded their free safety, Darren Mail, to the Jets for a first-rounder. And in a separate trade, they traded away their wide receiver, Ryan Switzer, for a second-round pick. Houston got rid of their wide receiver, Braxton Miller, which is interesting to note because Will Fuller went down over the weekend for a left guard for the Giants, and Zach Banner. Braxton Miller had a solid game, 3 catches, 32 yards. And Denver, they trade away their tight end, C.J. Fiedorowicz, for their defensive tackle in Cleveland by the name of Vernon Butler, who, by the way, went down with a shoulder tear. He's out at least for the next week or so. But Fiedorowicz certainly helped out in Cleveland. He had 4 catches, 27 yards, and a touchdown. All these teams seem to have made additions and certainly seem to try and bolster what they have to help out. But I really think the Minnesota trades are certainly interesting, and you would know a little bit more of that being involved and up there in Minnesota yourself.
Well, the Minnesota trades, Deron Mail was a backup free safety that we took off of the Bears practice squad 2 years ago. We developed him as a backup to Harrison Smith, and he progressed so quickly and became such a good player that we just couldn't see him being a backup anymore to Harrison Smith. So we wound up dealing him away, got the late first-round pick more than likely from the Jets. And then Ryan Switzer was a guy that we loved. I mean, he's been a great receiver, had right around 65 catches and 900 yards each of his first 2 seasons in the league, was a great receiver out of the slot. But we picked up Philip Dorsett, who is a much faster receiver, gives us a different element that you don't normally see with the Vikings. And we were looking at how do we get Switzer and Dorsett both on the field at the same time, and it just became one of the things that we just were like, I think Dorsett's as good as a receiver. He looked as good as him, but he's faster. He's much more agile. He's more of a playmaker. So we're like, okay, we can't get all these guys on the field. We have some solid guys at the bottom of the depth chart that can fill in, and so we decided to move him and got a second round pick for him. So definitely happy with that. We'll have a big draft coming up. Hopefully, we can get some guys that can play for us. Interesting to note, as you were talking about Braxton Miller, the Texans go out and trade him away, trying to pick up some extra depth along the offensive line, improve their offensive line, which is always something that I think every team in the league is trying to do. But as they do that, the next week, Will Fuller goes down to injury, and now Braxton Miller is a guy that could fill in there. They're a little thin at wide receiver. Delvin Allen's going to have to be thrust into a starting spot. He's not really a number 2 guy. He's more of a slot guy, kind of a guy you can take some shots deep with. He's a great kick returner. Now he's going to be forced into the number 2 role for at least 7 weeks from what it looks like, and that's going to be an interesting story to watch on that one. Tyreek Hill, I think, is an interesting pickup for Tennessee. Like you said, he didn't get a whole lot going, but it's going to be interesting to watch. He's got good speed. Kind of interesting that Kansas City got rid of him, but they pick up a big bruising back in Derrick Henry. Now they got 3 guys that can kind of run the ball and be bowling balls in there. So interesting running game going on in Kansas City. Overall, just a fantastic flurry of trades and just a lot of excitement. A lot of guys did some things to improve their teams. The Jets picking up Mail and picking up a free safety that they didn't have. That could be maybe the thing that clinches it for them. They weren't able to get to the AFC Championship game this year, and maybe that's the player that makes the difference. Again, Houston, we'll see what they look like next week in our game of the week. They're going to be playing the Titans, so a few of these guys that we talked about in trades are all going to be involved in that game. They'll be interesting to watch. That's going to happen Tuesday night at 8 o'clock Central Time. You guys be sure to tune in for that as the Texans and the Titans square off in that AFC South rivalry. Before we wrap up, what do you think about that game of the week? What can we expect from that matchup?
I think one of the things you have to look at is Marcus Mariota is gone at least until midseason, and JT Barrett is going to have to fill in. He didn't play great this last week, but the rookie running back and Stacey Capers had a big game. But I will say this, it'll be interesting to see who's going to win the battle in the trenches. Houston has a ferocious front 7 with J.J. Watt and Jadeveon Clowney being thrown into the mix and some solid players all around on the inside. It'll be interesting to see who is going to win that battle. Will it be the Tennessee running game and their offensive line? And can they protect JT Barrett going forward? Or is Houston's defense just going to be too much for Titans to handle?
Definitely a great matchup to watch. I'm excited for it. These guys had some battles last year. Definitely due for some more battles this year. Tennessee off to a good start by knocking off Jacksonville, who a lot of people thought were going to win that division this year. So Tennessee's making a statement. Actually kind of won that game kind of handily, and now Houston's a little banged up. It's definitely going to be a fun game to watch. So again, tune in 8 o'clock Central Time this Tuesday, February 28th. Was going to feature that big AFC South matchup. We appreciate you guys all tuning in. We hope you guys enjoyed the show, and we are advanced to week 2. You guys go in and get your games in, and we will see you guys back on Tuesday, and then we will have another recap show next Sunday at 11 a.m. Hope you guys all have a great week. For David Roy, I'm Mike Peters, signing off.